Hello. Let's talk about troubleshooting using the bank register. So the number one issue that I see people having that they use the bank register to help them with is when you see a variance between your bank balance and your QuickBooks balance. So oftentimes clients come to me and they say, I have this big variance between these two balances and I can't figure out why. I always send them to the bank register first. So let's go into a bank register. You get a lot of information in this screen specifically about your balances. So the first thing I would want to look at is what's going on with the green squares. If you're seeing all transactions where there's a C and a green square, that usually means that you're in good shape. There could be a duplication issue or some other small issues, but that's the first place I start is, what has a green square and what doesn't. If you're seeing a lot of transactions that don't have a little green square, then those are manually created transactions that have not yet cleared the bank. So you created the transaction, but it hasn't matched up to any actual transaction in that bank feed. So those are the ones that you want to look at. And it could be fine. If you created a manual transaction, but you expect it to hit in the next couple of days, then that's great. You just know that it's a timing issue that's causing your variance. You may want to look more closely at some of those manual transactions and understand why they're there. So maybe you had a check you sent to someone and they haven't deposited it yet, so it's not clearing the bank. So you may want to check in with that person. Or maybe you had some payroll transactions that are just sitting in there and they seem kind of old, so you're a little concerned about it. So really you're getting some information that you can look into and understand, why has that transaction not cleared yet? Another common thing I see with these manual transactions is to do with invoicing. And we discuss this more in our invoicing course, but I want to make you aware of it because it's very common. When you go in to an invoice and you receive it as paid, you'll usually choose a banking account and it will create an entry in here saying, we got the payment, and then eventually you need to match that payment up to the deposit. But a lot of times those payments don't get matched to the deposit, so they're just sitting in here and they're causing a variance in the bank balances. So if you see a lot of payments sitting in here and they don't have the little green square, those need to be looked into. So there's, a couple reasons why that can happen. Maybe those checks were never deposited, and so, the payment never matched up to the actual deposit because the deposit doesn't exist. It could also be that the deposit did happen, but it wasn't properly matched up in the bank feed. So just be aware that if you're having that issue a lot, you may need to get a little extra support because that can cause a lot of issues in QuickBooks. And you'll also catch that error within the reconciliation screen. But that's just one thing that you can look out for. You will need to fix those received payment items so that they eventually match up to the final deposit. Another thing you might want to look out for in the bank register are duplicates. Sometimes, there'll just be an error with the sync and it'll bring in duplicate entries. So if you can look through and see if you see any duplicates. And if you know they're duplicates, then you can just click and delete any duplicate. You may also, if you feel like transactions are missing here, you might want to double check. First of all, the bank feed. You want to make sure they've been added here. If you've added them, there might be another problem, but always check here first, because if you haven't added the transaction yet, it won't show in the bank register. But if you've checked that and you're still missing the transaction, and that's a fact because you're looking at your bank statement, then you might have to manually add that transaction. And that, every once in a while that happens. There's just a sync error. So always want to double check your bank statement to make sure it did in fact happen. But if you see that, then you can manually add it. And we'll also talk through, you can see whether a transaction has been reconciled here. And often there are just issues with the transaction was deleted, so it got unreconciled, and we can fix that within the bank register, but we will talk about that later. So again, very useful tool for troubleshooting issues between your bank balance and your QBO balance. So definitely check this out if you're needing information on what's going on with your balances.